In today's YouTube video, we're going to be exploring shadows. They're an aspect of realistic watercolour painting which are often overlooked by beginners. Let's start off by looking at birds' feet. I've noticed that some of my members do make the mistake of not putting a shadow underneath the bird's feet. Okay. If you don't put a shadow underneath there, then you find that what will happen, it looks like it's floating on whatever it's stood on. So get a shadow in place. That's the answer really, more than anything. Just make sure that you do get something for it to stand on. So you need something underneath the feet, some bit of a shadow there. So a little bit of colour. As you can see here, that's all I'm doing. Small amount of colour. And as you can see, already it looks like that foot is grounded, doesn't it? Yeah. And look how grounded that is now. But by just adding this bit of colour in there, that's all I'm doing with that. Okay, and let's get some details on this, and it's starting to dry anyway. Now the shadow itself can be quite a simple one, like this one here with just some blended washes of colour. But we can also do with this, once it's dry, you can start adding a little bit of detail in there as well. So if you want to intensify that shadow, make it a little bit darker, a little bit richer, then you can do. And all I want to do with this actually at the moment is just work with horizontal lines. And that's because I want to create more of a flat surface. And this anchors down this foot, it really does. So that kind of works in conjunction with the shadow we've already painted on there. So adding the lines within this wood texture, for example, will help to ground that subject that you're working on. We'll carry on looking at the wood, but this time the shadow cast by the spade handle. You can see that I've already applied a greyer tone in the region of the shadow, and I'll show you how I work on that now. Oh, by the way, all the paintings featured in today's video are available in full on my online school. I'll drop a link in the description down below and also a card to the top right. So just dampen down the underside of there, just lightly dampen it, that's what you need to do. And drop in that colour just to darken it that a little bit more. It's going to get darker when we add the detail over the top of this anyway. Just add a little bit more like that. That was easy, wasn't it? Just like that. Hey. And then, just when we've got the opportunity, remember we've got this little gap here, let's just wet this area down again. But I'm going to wet this down to that shadow, the shadow that's cast from probably about here, look. And that kind of angle going down more towards probably about between 7 and 8 o'clock direction. It's really wet again. Don't go over it too many times because you'll end up pulling the paint off underneath. That can depend on the paper actually that you've got as well. And then get the same colour and we'll drop that in into our dampened area. Just a little bit of a shadow. And the colour will only go where the water is. So it can only flow where the water, where the paper's wet, should I say. So that's the good thing about it. I'm going to get a little bit of burnt sienna just to warm that up. And probably underneath there as well. Look at that, isn't that lovely? And then once it's dry, we can start to add the details over the top. Now, I make sure that my brush isn't too overloaded when I do this. And I've also got to think about the direction of the lines, the consistency of the paint as well, and also how much paint we add. So where it's really dark underneath the handle itself, you've got to really darken that down, but still allow some of the lighter areas to show through. And you do this through layers and layers of detail. And the more layers that you add, the richer the tone will be, but also the darker the colour will end up being as well. As you can see from underneath the handle as well for that shadow, it's getting really dark in there now. And that's because of the fact I'm adding numerous layers of detail underneath there. But you can see what I mean when I say allow some of the layers to show through as well. So don't completely cover it with detail. Think about those layers that you've already applied to the wood and then add more over the top. Now, inset legs can cast quite different shadows depending on how high they stand. We've got a shadow coming down here, then loops back up and then just kind of comes into that area there. So let's put an outline there first and then add the shadow in the direction that everything goes in. So just paste it in that way And then very lightly just pull out the edges just a little bit, just to kind of break that shadow up. Just a touch, you don't have to break it up too much. So there's one. And then we'll add another one in down here. So that comes down to about there for the shadow. A little bit lower, about there roughly. And then comes over towards this leg. Okay, so the same again. Break up the edges just marginally, just a little bit, so it's not too sharp. And there we go for that. I tend to find, that when I'm working on shadows, is that sometimes initially they may not look quite right, It's only when the painting is more or less completed is when the shadows sort of come together. Because we're adding all them details around it as well, aren't we, when we're working on it. So when you're working on something like this ladybird, or ladybug, depends where you live, I know, then you find that with this, some of the shadows are actually blended out a little bit in places. And that's because this ladybird is actually stood on something which is, well, round. And because it's going away from the body of the ladybird, the shadow also kind of blurs away, kind of fades out. So as I paint all these fine marks, then you can see the way that the shadow is starting to blend in. And then prevents this ladybird from looking as if it's floating in the air. Now you can see that this butterfly looks really flat on this piece of wood. It's as if I've cut it out and plonked it on there. Now one thing I did do on this little butterfly is put a bit of a shadow just underneath the bottom wing. I want it to look as if it's just got the top part of the wing, the top wing, touching the wood, but the bottom wing just coming away from the wood that little bit. So just adding just a light shadow underneath there, as you can see, just kind of pulls it forward that little bit more. Right, it's nearly dry, nearly dry. I want to add a shadow using that mixture of indigo and burnt umber. And you can see this is a size 5 brush again, by the way. On the photograph there's a shadow coming down here. So just very lightly touching the paper over the top. And that's in line with the top of the knuckles on the toes there. Little thing. And the same on this side as well, actually. I'm just going to darken this area down here. This is all shadowed. And that kind of hooks up to there, a little bit of an angle towards the leg. Trying to kind of work out where it all goes. Around there. That'll do. And just to darken the area around this side of the leg as well. Just where the shorts are. I know, as I call them. And draw a little bit more around there. I'm trying to pick out where it's darker in places as well. So when we add the white over the top, these dark colours will show through a little bit more. Then give you a bit more of a kind of 3D feel as well. So the shadow is there as well, so we'll add that into that section. I'm going to water this down a little bit more now, so it's getting paler as we come towards the extremities. And then that comes over to there. A little bit more, Paul, that's it. Then that also comes over to there. Now, if the shadow's too dark, which I think it might be a little bit, it's going to dry paler, we know. You can just go over with a soft, clean, damp brush. Just like that. Just to soften it back a little bit. And just ease off the bottom of that line a little bit with a damp, clean brush. And we've got ourselves a shadow. There you go. I'll just soften that one there a little bit as well, actually. You can see how well those dark washes over the feathers worked. Now that I've applied the lightest layer of feather detail over the top. The shadows look more realistic now though, and really make it look like the twigs are casting shadows on the goldfinch. Now let's take a quick look at how I use shadows to indicate that the feathers are overlaying one another. And I want to really pick out the edge of these feathers now, just to really kind of get some definition going on these. And you can see on the photograph as well that the feather line goes in that direction towards like 11 o'clock. And they're kind of broken in places. They've got all these broken edges. Well, they're not broken edges where the feathers go, I know. But you know, they look like they're broken. And then we'll do the same for the shadow underneath, because that's the same kind of way actually. You can just see the direction that the shadow's going underneath this feather. Must be sticking out a little way from the other feathers actually. Well, it's got to be. So that's bluey black. I do like to be quite technical with my colour names. Bluey black, yellowy brown, and a bit of an edge there. We can always soften it if it's wrong. Remember, you're in control of this watercolour. You know, you can change it. You can, if you're not happy with what you've got, you can just change it around. Now these feathers haven't got all these little sharp edges there. So what we're going to do, just vary it slightly. I'm going to tap. So tiny taps initially. Skipping now in places. No, I'm not going to do the double Dutch. Just skipping in places just a little bit here and there. Down to the side and down there. Deal. How's that? And then we've got another feather here which you need to pick out. So again, it's another shadow just underneath that feather there. See, that's looking a bit better. Now we've kind of depicted them a little bit more. We've already looked at applying shadows to wood and how the base foundation wash and subsequent layers builds up the different tones. You can see this within the planks of wood on the floor here. As you can see with the kitten that I'm painting at the moment, is that the shadow goes right across that paw. So because of that, I've got to try and paint those lines a little bit darker, more intense, by thickening the mix up a little bit, but also adding more detail as well. And the more detail that I add, the darker the lines will be, and because of the shadow, the fur will start to look a little bit fuller. Because all them details over the top, it creates numerous layers of fur, allowing those other layers underneath to show through, of course. So, when you think about painting shadows, in this case across the paw of this kitten, then you've got to think about how deep them tones need to be. The shadows are not black, of course, but they're going to be rich tones, deeper tones of the colours I've already used within the kitten's fur. I'm working on the leg, as you can see, but I'm adding some watercolour white. Now the white will highlight it, even though the leg is quite dark as we can see here. I'm trying to create just a few little highlights here and there, because even in the shadowed area, sometimes you see paler areas, slightly highlighted areas that just catch just a hint of light. You can also see that towards the end of the paw, there's even more white, but I know we've got a bit of a white foot there, haven't we? But in this case, I need to highlight those areas. So any areas that catch the light to contrast against the shadow. I'm going to illuminate that a little bit with this watercolour white, which you can then in turn tone that white down with a little bit of colour afterwards as well. We're going back to birds now, and the shadows are cast on the wood. And you can see here, I've not added the shadow cast by the bird or the one under the foot. You can actually see how ungrounded the foot is without it. So I'll just show you what you can do if you want to go back to some old paintings and add the shadows in. It is possible, so let me show you how. So I want to wet, without washing too much away, that area there. Thinking about the line coming down, just that area. Don't brush it too much, otherwise you just obviously rub everything out. Then get that browny black colour and pop that in over the top without passing over too many times, because if you keep going over the top, you could just rub all that away underneath. We can sharpen this back up again afterwards, and probably would have been easier to put this on first, but in hindsight I didn't realise. Goes to show I'm not always right. I know I'm not always right. I'm just going to make sure we got the edge of this piece of bark there. And then we've also got another section underneath here. So we're going to have to give the foot something to kind of hold on to, because it looks like it's floating on the branch. So this is browny black, just going around the outside. Try not to rub it too much, because it'll just make everything underneath blend in. And then a little bit more around there, because obviously this is now hovering over the top there. So we've got a bit of a shadow coming off there. See, that looks better now. It's kind of anchored down, isn't it? We'll look at all the darker darks now. The darkest darks, which is around underneath the claw or the foot, just underneath. A little bit on the claw there as well. I'm going to pull in a few hairs from the outside in, and the reason why I do it that way around is because it's a nice way to finish off his little feathery bottom just underneath there. And remember to go in line with the bark when you get down there. My brush is getting quite dry now, I just noticed. That's in line with the bark. Put a little bit more in there, I think. And there we go. I painted this fish very recently for a tutorial for my online school. And I used the same sort of method for applying shadows on the scales as I did on the feathers I did earlier. But when you're working on shadows with something like this, you've got to think about the way that the scales overlap one another as well. So where one scale overlaps another, that will then create a shadow on the scale underneath, if you know what I mean. Okay, so think about layering scales, and the one underneath will have a shadow just cast on the very inside edge of it. Then that shadow will get blended out just that little bit as well. But you've also got to think about the light source when you're working with any shadows, especially something like the scales on this fish. So which direction is that light coming from? Is it coming from the left, the right, or from above? So think about that before you start working on shadows. And one other tip as well on this particular fish project, when you're working with the shadows, is consider those reflections as well. You find some areas a little bit darker and other areas are quite light. So in certain places, you'll have to use weaker shadows and not quite as dark. Finally, I want to share with you how I use shadows when I'm painting branches. It's the best way of making them look round. Now, let's get a different colour. What shall we go for? Might go for a little bit of that green colour, you know, that sort of olivey deep green colour. Just that phthalo blue and burnt sienna. Let's grab some of that, not too much on the brush, still using the same size 6 for now, because I'll add some detail over this anyway later on, which we will do. And a little bit of this, I'm changing the colour now as you can see, compared to the reference photograph. As I said, it doesn't have to be the same. A little bit of this colour within there as well, not much. Just adds a bit more shape to this branch as well, doesn't it? Just finding it to the very edge. Or the inner edge, of course. Not the outer edge. Of course not. And that, I dare say, will do for the basic kind of foundation wash on that branch. So here we go. Let's start off around, I don't know, let's go on the underside first of all. I'm going to start by giving some wiggles and jiggles towards the lowest part, but using the very tip of the brush. I haven't overloaded this brush, as you can see here. Just added some very tiny marks in there. I'm going to lessen the marks the higher up I go towards the middle. So when you're down the bottom, you want to create that roundness, don't you? That kind of round feel to the branch. So increase the marks lower down and lessen the marks towards the middle. And when that brush is about to run out of paint again, as we always keep going on about, that's when you want to go towards the middle area as well to add some very fine marks in that middle area. Now we do have a little bit of a shadow on the right hand side of this toe here. So we can add a little bit of colour there as well. Just create an impression of some shadow there. Then keep working on the squiggle and stippling motion. So you tap in for stipples, you're squiggling like a little figure of eights. Very minuscule though. Keep them nice and small. I hope that's given you a good insight into how I use shadows in my realistic watercolour paintings. They may seem unimportant, but actually, when you see the difference they make, they are vital. If you'd like to see a little bit more about this lovely piece of painting, head to the video to the top right. I'll see you there.